Eyewitness News. This is Indiana Insiders.
Good morning on this Sunday morning, and welcome to Indiana Insiders. Right up to Election Day, we're hosting candidates for the Republican nomination for United States Senate. This morning, we're joined by Mike Braun, Harvard-educated businessman from Jasper, Indiana. Good morning. Morning. I'm curious because the first debate, well, last two debates I've attended, sat in on, did you ever think that being Harvard-educated would be a negative? I have been surprised how you've been attacked. You can almost hear the tone, Harvard-educated.
Well, the only good thing is after I got that Harvard education, I moved right back to my hometown, so that kind of diffuses anything about being a Harvard-educated guy, because to be honest, when I graduated from Wabash back in '76, they actually admitted people directly from undergrad into business school. Now you've got to work 2 or 3 years. So for me,
isn't that a positive though, going to Harvard?
I always thought it was, and you know, I took that education and then moved back to my hometown. And then back then, many people thought, "What are you doing?" You know, you get highly degreed from Wabash and Harvard, and you come back to your hometown, and that was simply my wife and I grew up in Jasper. She's going to have her business now for 40 years in our downtown, so that was a great thing. And I worked for a kitchen cabinet company for 3 years, and my only job other than that has been with the company that I had an opportunity to maybe get involved with and then buy a portion of it. And of course, there are a lot of trials and tribulations when you do it, but that all happened because we moved back to our hometown. And people always say, well, have you used more of your education or the School of Hard Knocks? And there's no doubt about it, the School of Hard Knocks. You know, I draw on occasionally things that, you know, I went to school for, but most of what you learn in the real world, you have to experience it, and definitely the case for me.
You ran for representative in 2014, served for 3 years, and then resigned to run for Senate. What was it? Was there just something not to your liking at the State House, or did you just decide?
Well, I was always one, when I was going to get involved, I wanted to be a part of the process. You know, I was lucky I was on Ways and Means and Roads and Education 1 year. So the 3 years I was there, I really had an active involvement. And for Southern Indiana, I went there because our infrastructure was either lacking or terrible or both. And my constituents said, Mike, try to weigh in on getting that dynamic changed.
Let me get to this, because this dovetails into the very next thing. You've taken a lot of hits from your opponents about tax increases, but you've explained that. But let me show you a little bit of what folks at home, show you a little bit of what he was up against at the Allen County Lincoln Day dinner recently about tax increases.
Then why is Mike Braun's solution to every problem to raise taxes? 45 times, including the state's largest in history. I don't think that's the solution to anything.
Your answer to that night was the same today.
Yeah.
You were talking about the roads bill.
Exactly, and of course there weren't 45 tax increases. There was one, a 10-cent a gallon tax. Everything else Todd Rokita is referring to is false, in the sense that those were fines and fees that we address every other year as part of the budget bill or the road bill. So most people that were from my area, almost 80% of them, wanted to do something that was going to set us on the pathway to start fixing the potholes and maybe getting a few roads built other than what you see around Indianapolis, because now we're in the catbird seat because President Trump has talked about infrastructure from the get-go. And now it's a 50-50 matching because the federal government is broke and they don't have the wherewithal until things change there to really take on infrastructure without getting help from the states. Thank goodness to Governor Daniels, Governor Pence, and of course the centerpiece of Governor Holcomb's 17-year was long-term road funding, and cost most taxpayers very little for the benefits that we'll get. And sometimes you have to be smart enough to see that some things you just have to make a hard decision and do it. And
isn't that how government's supposed to work?
Should, and most of the time it doesn't, because at any form of government, especially out in D.C., people go there with good intentions, great campaign slogans while they're running, and then start getting involved with all the things that kind of draw you into the swamp, the perks and the pay. And, you know, my two opponents, when they're not in the career of being a politician again here soon, they're going to walk away with a great lifetime pension and health insurance that all of us would dream of. And that's why things, especially when it comes to D.C., have not been working. People go there for the wrong reason and beholden then to lobbyists and PACs and the people financing their campaign. I have none of that. I'm running where I'm putting a lot of my own resources in, and the folks backing me are, like me, fed up with business as usual. So.
Right. Let me get on. I noticed on your website you have a picture of some hunting rifles when you're talking about the Second Amendment. How do you feel about gun control in general, and how would you reduce gun violence?
Well, I think that whenever you see a tragedy like what occurred in Florida, it's painful to watch. And, of course, every time it does occur, the answer from the other side of the aisle would be to start infringing upon your Second Amendment rights. And I saw a lot of other stuff down there that didn't look like it was working. All the cues that were given by the perpetrator on social media. You know, why don't we ferret that out? Why don't we check it out? School security, you know, looked like that was an issue. And here in Indiana, we're ahead of the game. We're one of a handful of states that is actually out front there. And when it comes to law enforcement, not only did they not, you know, kind of maybe prevent it by checking out all the cues that were given on social media, you know, they actually, you know, didn't get involved once the tragedy did start to occur. So I think it's a slippery slope when you start to just immediately go at infringing the rights of law-abiding citizens, which you do. Whenever you start to restrict gun rights, the criminals and the mentally ill find a way to get it. And I'd like to try to enforce the laws that are on the books currently, make sure that's happening. And, of course, we got the strongest gun rules and laws in Chicago of any place in the country, and look at, you know, the problems we still have there. So
I want to get to this past week. The federal judges ruled against the president and DACA to be ordering DACA to be reinstated. We also saw ICE raids here in central Indiana in the last week going after undocumented immigrants. We want to show you Erica Fierro, who was brought to this country by her parents 30 years ago. Now she fears she'll be forced to take her two children, Angel, age 8, and Jennifer, age 3, and have to leave. Indiana Archbishop Charles Thompson called for this to stop and said, quote, "Nothing absolves us from always standing up for the most vulnerable among us," end of quote. Explain your position on this.
And I'm going to agree with that in general, because I think that but all the problems associated with it come from the fact that we, for 2 or 3 decades, have not secured our border. And, of course, there are hardship stories all along with it. Many people come to this country for a variety of reasons, but they're trying to escape bad lives and atrocities elsewhere. But all the things like sanctuary cities and visa lotteries and DACA, I think if you don't secure the border first, you know, we're not putting any definition to how do you control these same things from occurring again. So all the things that we hear that tear at our heartstrings, I think we do have to address it. But until you secure the border, I don't think it makes sense to really do something about that, because you've not cured the source of where all these problems have come from in the first place. So, you know, I do want to secure the border and build a wall where necessary, and then take the high priority items and start addressing it.
Do we really think a wall will stop this?
I think it will, because in places where it's high traffic, I don't think any other method will. I think if we don't do that and try it in places where we know it's being abused consistently and has for over the years, you know, I don't like the symbolism with it, but the fact is, again, business as usual. Look what it's given us. It's given us a host of problems, and I think that until you do something different from what we've been doing, you can expect more of the same.
I hear, and I know you've heard it too, when President Reagan was at the wall, tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev. Yeah. It's hard to believe we're talking about building one.
And it's also hard to believe that there has not been other methods used to try to stem it before it's become a chronic, you know, significant problem. And I don't see that there's going to be any other solution, because we've had 20 or 30 years of where it's been systematically abused, the law's been broken. What's to change that dynamic?
All right.
It's not an easy solution.
We're talking immigration with United States Senate candidate Mike Braun. When we come back, We'll be talking about one of his commercials on the issue that some believe went a little too far. Stay with us.